The World Tomorrow. The Worldwide Church of God presents Herbert W. Armstrong.
I'm not here to cram anything down your throat. It will happen, and when it happens, you will know that God or Allah sent a messenger here to tell you this, because I am his servant.
He said, God is going to do a new thing among the people of God, even in the Crusade Church of God in Russellville, something like he has never done before.
And I'm here to bring you the truth, because you don't hear this from any other voice. No one else is telling you the things that God is telling you through me. He's speaking through me.
If we're going to be that great and mighty people, such as the world has never seen, nor shall again, that's a new thing. What good is it if you're comfortable and God isn't?
And there has been many, many false churches. Jesus said, I will build my church. He didn't say, I will build my churches. But there is a true church that is undeceived.
And that we can be a people where the blood of Christ can flow from us into their open wounds to heal them and bring them into the wedding chamber.
So welcome back once again to the Cult Next Door podcast. I am Mattie Lassiter, as always, joined by my sister Ashleigh Teeter. Today we had Michael Sandow. We call him Sandy. We had him back again. You'll remember him from a few months ago. We had several really interesting episodes with him. So we brought him back in today to do a couple episodes to kind of wrap up the love move, which you'll come to learn it as. Kind of really what led to pretty much everybody's departure from the Crusade Church, and kind of the story of how the church devolved and how everyone kind of left. I mean, Ashleigh, I thought it was a really good conversational couple episodes. It wasn't our norm, but I really enjoyed these in particular.
Yeah, I did too, because I feel like I got a better handle of what the love move actually is and what it entailed and how it impacted Sandy. And then we covered some really interesting prophecies from Dad. We talked about demons by name. We even discussed a rat from heaven.
Yeah, fire rat
from heaven. So I think this is a really good episode, and take a listen.
So where we kind of last left off, we talked a little bit about the love move, I think was the proper term that we had for it. But we haven't really talked about exactly what that meant. From your perspective, when you hear the term love move, like, what do you think that is? Where does that take you back to mentally during that time, like pre-COVID and post?
Well, I have negative emotions now, but at the time, it was something that God was doing on the earth, specifically in Russellville. And it was something that everyone in the church wanted to be a part of, but nobody really knew what the hell was going on. And I think I might have brought it up in my last podcast, but it was basically what happened is that God was pouring his love out on our church through certain members where they were experiencing an overwhelming sense of, not in a sexual way, an overwhelming sense of wanting to just be next to the person and, have the person's head on their shoulder and just really be manifesting love through your bodies in a non-sexual way. And this was God pouring his love out on us, because what is the scripture? This is how you know if you're my disciples, you will love one another. That's what we all thought in the church was happening. But what I think was actually happening, having had ample time to look at it now, is that the church was becoming stale. There were no prophecies coming out anymore. It was just stale, kind of stagnant. So I believe that, and this is just my personal belief, we've talked about it with a few of the other members, and everyone kind of agrees that because of its staleness, your dad had to like produce the next powerful move or something, the next thing to get people motivated, stimulated, so that we could see this church live on for generations.
And there was a big emphasis too. I think part of the reason why that was so important to Dad in particular is that back when Dad and our sister Sarah and our sister Jen went to Africa on a mission trip, there was a particular African brother that they regarded as like a prophet of some sort, and he had these amazing prophecies about the Crusade Church, about how they're going to do things that no other church has ever done, kind of thing. And so there's that built-in pressure of like, well, they're prophecies from this guy that are from the Lord saying all this stuff is going to happen. Well, then, like, yeah, some of it happened, quote unquote, during those years immediately following, but then none of it was happening anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not just that I think Dad wanted that stuff. It's also like, well, all these prophecies said so. So it's got to happen. Like, we got to make something happen here. So I think that was a big factor. It's just like that kind of external pressure from these amazing prophecies,
Well, he's probably looking at his watch and his calendar going, when the hell is this thing going to happen?
Yeah.
I'm 70 years old and let's get going. I'll just make the prophecies happen, which is kind of a human thing. I guess across the board with all kinds of things when you're going to make predictions, but it's a really dangerous thing to do that, because then if you're not seeing results, you're going to be tempted to just create a love movement or, whatever.
I feel like there's an incongruency here, though, because he's speaking about this as this brotherly love type of connection with each other, while at the same time reading from the Song of Solomon and playing songs from the Song of Solomon. So I'm curious, did that feel incongruent to you guys at the time, that there was an element of, at least from my perspective, sitting back listening to other members, it seemed to be that there was a sexual element to this, an intimacy that was beyond brotherly.
Yeah. Let's
You're
get
right.
into it. I mean, I think,
Right.
there was definitely a lot of imagery about bridegroom
Mhm.
going on, and I feel like that only increased.
Yeah.
And then Song of Solomon being read, songs that are based on Song of Solomon, worship songs that are, if they're not based on Song of Solomon, or of the same ilk. Like, it was definitely, that was trending that way. Pairing people, and you can talk about this too, like pairing people of the opposite sex to slow dance together on stage
Chelsea.
to worship music. Like, that happened. That was a regular thing.
No,
I was really confused when all that stuff was going on, but at the same time, I wanted to always be on the cutting edge of whatever was happening. So, and certainly with the love movement. So I was trying to throw myself into this whole thing without really understanding what any of this meant. So yeah, when you're reading the Song of Solomon, which I think David mentioned in one of his podcasts, that like it's a totally bizarre book to be reading publicly. And it's weird because it's scripture. Everyone reads the Bible if you're a Christian, but then you're talking about, the imagery is just very provocative. So yeah, it was very, very confusing. I mean, it's still a big mess trying to understand that stuff. Like, God is our Father, but he also kind of sees us and he wants to have sex with us. I'm just being real. Like,
we're being brought into the wedding chamber, but it's like a weird,
it's totally weird, but so I was confused back then, but because that's what we were supposed to do, we were supposed to be really immersing ourselves in these things, Song of Solomon. I was just reading it and going, this is how God feels about us. And maybe, I was really trying to produce my own, it wasn't coming naturally to me.
right.
So I was trying to immerse myself in this so that hopefully, when God felt like touching me, it would all, no pun intended, that it would all, Yeah.
Yeah, you brought up something really interesting that I haven't thought of before, but so the church is spoken of as the bride,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But then we as members were told that we would be sons and daughters of God the Father, and therefore brothers, because I guess as spirit beings, we were not going to be male or female, but they use the term brothers with Jesus. So that is a really difficult thing to wrap your head around. Like, we're the bridegroom and this is the wedding chamber, but actually we're like siblings with Jesus.
It's
and
very
God is
incestual.
yeah.
We're all just kind of having spiritual sex with each other. And yeah, it's very hard to understand.
And I do think it's important to set this, and at the risk of repeating myself, because we've talked about this for 30 episodes off and on, but I think it's important to kind of set the stage on some of this. It was hammered home. I don't know how many times we heard it during the love move. It doesn't matter what it looks like. That was hammered into our heads.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't about sex, then there would be no reason to ever say that.
Huh.
Right? Because what else would he be talking about?
What do you mean? Do you mean that
He
was
wouldn't-
going, that's where he was headed mentally?
Yes,
Okay.
because historically
Which
in
I
the
can't argue
church,
with.
right? Historically in the Worldwide Church of God, and then also in Living Church of God, and with Dad personally, they always used that terminology about avoiding the appearance of evil, but they always seem to connect that to sexual activity. That is the only context I've ever heard that said in. So for Dad to start saying, don't worry about what it looks like, in other words, override what you've been told forever to avoid the appearance of evil, I just find it peculiar that he meant anything other than something sexual.
Well, and at the very least, I think it says, what I'm asking and instructing you guys, you congregants, to do, you're not going to be comfortable with because of all of the years of indoctrination that you've had pointing in the opposite direction all these years.
Absolutely.
So he knew that part for certain. Whether, like, we can have debates with anybody on whether it was headed towards a sexual thing or not. I think it probably was.
Yeah. I think there's no doubt. And as someone who is coming in and seeing this from the outside in, that seemed very clear to me because, like we've talked about this, his church, I shouldn't even call it a church, right? Like, his cult would have been a total outlier if the direction didn't go into some type of sexual depravity. Right? I mean, they all do that. I mean, it's all interconnected as far as power and sex and money and all of these things. And so I think it would have been really odd if it did not go all the way there, because I feel like it was for sure on that path. You guys were getting acclimated to being comfortable with unwanted touch.
Definitely.
Well, and also, you would have to look at this situation as the exception.
Right.
Which was
exactly
important for
it.
me. Like, when looking back at it, kind of getting an aerial view where nobody first off, you don't want to think that you were in a cult. There's lots of things that you don't want to think. And that's one of them, is that this was going into some sexual arena here, some area that's not kosher. But when looking at it from above, you would have to say, well, yeah, all of these, it all points to the same thing, like all of these other sex cults, but not this one. And why would I think that?
Right.
Just because I don't want to? Like, for me, it's like, yeah, I don't want to, but looking at the actual evidence of where it was moving towards, well, what am I supposed to do with that? It certainly looked like it.
Right. And I think there's also that part that that's your dad. And for years, he's been telling us who he is. And that to me is part of almost like a brainwashing or a conditioning. It's like, oh, I'm a person that is above reproach. I'm a person that never has, a piano lesson with a female student alone. I'm always going to have someone else in the room because I want to be godlike and do things by the book. And I think hearing those things on a daily basis, not just that, but just him telling us about himself and who he is, that just gets into your psyche, and that's who you think he is. So then when he does something that is really out there and seemingly out of character, you make excuses because it's like, no, that's not who he is. He's this person, and he wouldn't do something like that. So I think that's part of it.
I agree. Yeah, and what you said rings true to me, that we're just kind of testing the waters for doing things that you didn't necessarily ever want to do. I was certainly in that camp. If this is what God requires, and if this is what, if that fiery arrow is going to miss me because I'm not taking part in, the love move by being physical with others, I don't want that to happen. So, of course, I'm going to do things that are very, very uncomfortable. And it just, but yeah, not to get off track, but I think that maybe what was going on in his head, either subconsciously or not, maybe premeditated, because it was the strangest thing to all of a sudden see, like a woman in the church put her head in a man's lap, and to have the man stroking her head for however long. And, you would look over there and glance, and at first it'd be very, very jarring. But then you'd think, well, we're not supposed to care about what this looks like. And then you start getting desensitized to it because more and more things like this just keep happening. But yeah, it seemed like it was a kind of conditioning. And for me, like I said, I did not want to miss the fiery arrow. So I was trying all kinds of things that were very uncomfortable to me. Dancing, slow dancing with women, the long, uncomfortable, sweaty hugs. Battle cries during worship. I think your dad used me as kind of he knew that I was a little bit kind of wild, right? Or kind of like to have fun and party. And so I could kind of bring this element of maybe like getting everyone on board with, the party of God.
Yeah, you got a little bit of feral in you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think he was using that.
Yeah.
He liked that energy.
Yeah.
He wanted people to get crazy,
Exactly.
But if he's relying on some of the other people who are there, well, they're not going to be getting crazy on their own. They need a push,
They need a hype man.
Yeah.
I was kind of the hype man. That's the best way. And then there were nights that I wouldn't be okay with it. Usually we got pretty crazy on the Friday night service where the lights were dim and we would normally listen to music. And that's what we still did, except it was this new element of touching and an extended service. Sometimes these things could last like 4 to 5 hours of listening to music and
the blue lights. That was kind of a newer thing because I remember before that, like I had wanted to do some things like that, but that was a no. Because that was mainstream. Like, we're not making a show of it. I remember that specifically being said. Like, no, we're going to have dim lights and the candles. And then when this happened, it was like, nope, game on. Like, let's get crazy with it and make it like it's a concert.
What type of music?
I've
it
got
was
some
popular
playlists. Yeah.
Popular worship music.
Yeah.
Oh,
a lot
okay.
of Bethel type stuff.
House fires.
Leland.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the fiery arrow, and I'm curious, is that biblical imagery or was this directly from a prophecy that Dad had?
There's a biblical root, I think, to any of this stuff, which is kind of how he was getting away with it.
Of course.
Because any of us skeptics could go back home and go, all right, fiery arrows. But so you could always make, and that's the thing with Christianity is you can make a case for almost any of this stuff. which is, a pretty dangerous thing. So fiery arrows, I'm sure it's talked about in Psalms maybe a little bit, but yeah, I think that was probably, he took that and like Matt said, he kind of made that his own prophecy that was going to infect the entire church.
That's a good way, good word to use, infect.
So the fiery arrow stuff that we're talking about, I've actually got a message, so I can just read this. This is from Dad to our family group. This is in August of 2019, and this will give a little insight into what he's talking about. It says, "The Lord told me that the arrow came for a fire and found it in me. I became the fire on the arrow, which is what we all witnessed Friday and Saturday. An arrow with holy fire to knit us all together and set us ablaze. It pierced me first, and then Sasha, joining our two hearts to beat as one next to Mama T, which is our mom. And I don't know yet where all it has spread, but it's going to set us all ablaze with a double portion anointing of the Spirit and power of the Almighty." And then I've got one more to read because he mentioned in that one the fire that we all witnessed. And I'll kind of read that little section here of what he's referencing. It says, "Just before I received the dream during a Friday night praise and prayer service, a brother saw fire fall on our lamp table on the stage. He ran up to put the fire out, but it had disappeared. It was fire from heaven. God has told me to build a golden altar to place in that spot, and that he will send his holy fire upon it that will spread all over the world through our ministry. This is why I've been writing and preaching about being the fire on the arrow and kindling afresh the fire in others and passing the flames."
So let's just state the obvious. God has this fiery arrow, and he found Dad.
Yeah.
Dad was the one.
Dad was the flame.
Yes. Okay, so it's the arrow finding the flame.
Yes.
And the flame was found in Dad.
And then the fire
naturally
from the arrow from Dad was spreading to other people.
Yes. So always central figure in every story. And then the other thing that struck me about that is that he and this other single woman in the church, their hearts were beating as one, he said. Was that the first time that he and this woman were spoken about in a context of having a connection with each other? Had you guys already been seeing that the two of them had a connection? Because we've talked about her and we talked about Dad already a little bit, I think, with David Brown. But I'm curious if this is when it started. No?
No, so we had seen the connection, but I don't think, I could be wrong, I don't think it was spoken about in these kind of terms up until this point. Because that message I read, that was August of 2019. That's when this thing kicked off. Like what I'm reading is like, that's when we were all like, okay, what is going on? Like here's this weird new thing that God's doing, a special move. Like that was the beginning of that. So I don't think up until that point that it was spoken about in those kind of like prophetic terms or anything, but that was the norm going forward, and it only got weirder. I think we'll probably get into it at some point, in the next few weeks, but, a lot of imagery about how this person that he's talking about, which we're calling Sasha, she's the image of the immature bride. And then Mama T, is the image of the mature bride. That kind of language and imagery was being used as to say, which, the way I even took it at the time is like, Dad's the groom, quote unquote. Mom's the mature bride. Sasha is the immature bride kind of thing. It was even weird then. But of course, we're also being conditioned and are partially conditioned to, well, yeah, this is strange, but there's nothing wrong. You know what I mean? At that point. But it's still like we're noticing these things.
And how many times has this happened in other cult groups where the cult leader is married and then he gets an eye for someone else and suddenly it's this divine providence thing that's happening where God is ordaining this. And this is so common.
And if you point it out, well, then you are opposing what God's doing.
Yeah.
That was definitely...
Don't stand in the way of what God is doing.
That was absolutely the vibe of that whole time period. Is like, you don't question that or insinuate that it's something wrong, because then you're standing in the way of this once in a eternity thing that God's doing in this particular church with these people. And the fire started here, so you can't say anything about that negatively. Like, it just sets everything up for, can't question this.
I remember that something was happening around that time when it first started. There were people that were being hit by this love arrow rather quickly. And there were some of us in the congregation that were, I guess, disheartened because we wanted the fiery love of God, but weren't getting there as quickly as a couple of the ones that were being struck right off the bat. So there were messages being preached to us like, guys, I know, don't lose heart. This is just paraphrase. Don't lose heart. You know, the arrow is going to hit everyone. It's going to spread. But then in the same breath, we would hear things like, but if the arrow is not coming to you, you need to go home and look at yourself because you're probably effing it up somehow. So that's the thing. It's like we would be hearing those things. And of course, he wasn't brash like that. But you'd go home and take a look at that and go, what? Am I standing in the way of my own success with the fiery arrow? So I need to hop on board with this. So it's just a really brilliant tactic to kind of get people that weren't in a comfortable spot being able to do these things that he wanted us to do, to be able to say, just don't worry about what it looks like. Do you want the love arrow or not? And then so we were all forced to kind of, weren't forced, but the choice was yours. It's like, you're either going to conform or you're going to miss the love arrow and you're going to continue being a miserable so-and-so. So I to me, it seems like a pretty brilliant tactic.
And also, I think there was another level there for the people who weren't completely comfortable with it, because there were more than a couple that, I remember we heard more than a few times, this love move cannot be stopped. That was hammered home. Yeah. So then if you're, however you feel about it, if you're for it or you're unsure about it, that message being driven home, like, it can't be stopped. If you're for it, you're like, okay, yeah, great, it's going to spread. If you're uncomfortable, well, then it's almost like you feel defeated, where it's like, yeah, I don't feel it exactly. It makes me uncomfortable what's going on, but God is saying, like, it can't be stopped. So, like, okay, I guess I better get comfortable with it. This is happening. It's kind of the way I felt at the time. Because I, just as a side note, I remember at the time my particular feeling on it was that I didn't understand it, but I thought, okay, if this is something God's doing, then, like, it's going to happen. There's no stopping it. I'm not going to stand in the way. I'm going to go with it.
It's like the bus is leaving and you better get on the bus or you get left behind.
I was like, I'm not feeling anything at this moment. I don't understand it, but, like, I'm not going to stand in the way. I guess I'll just go with whatever's happening.
Well, that's what I was going to say. When you said some people were hit with the arrow early on, by that, do you mean that they just fully embraced this love move or the physical connection with other people, or what did that look like for people who would be viewed as being struck by the arrow?
Yeah, well, there were people right away that were being able to show their affection, because it really was, that's one of the main things, was the hugs, these long hugs with the brushing of the back of the head. And there were some people that got on board rather quickly. And, you know, I was one that would be kind of side-eyeing while I was hands lifted in the air worshiping. And then you'd side-eye, what the hell is happening over there? And then you'd question or doubt yourself. Love movement? It's a love movement. It's happening. I haven't been struck by the arrow yet. But yeah, there were people that just embraced it right off the bat. And me being a skeptic, I had to really do a lot of work on myself to just, I want that arrow. I want that arrow.
Yeah. So the second prophecy with the fire at the stage, I know this is a really hysterically funny story. At least to me it is. And I want to hear what actually happened. What was the fire? Where did it come from?
The fire. Okay, so we had a lampstand up there. There was a table, and it had seven flames, the seven spirits of God.
Yeah,
What?
I think
Wait.
total it was, we had two large, I'm getting way in the weeds. Nobody needs to know this.
Well, I'm over here like 7 spirits. What?
Okay, so
I've never
So we-
heard this before.
Oh, you haven't?
No.
Yeah, that's biblical.
we had the two large lampstands here,
Mm-hmm.
and then we had two little like bowls. They were kind of like amber translucent bowls that had tea candles in them. I don't think those counted as part of the grouping
No.
that he's talking about. So those were like decorative. So we had the two main ones. Then there was a table. On the end of the table, on each end, was were these bowls with the tea candles, and then there was a tiered 5 like lampstand,
Like a
and those
candelabra.
yeah, kind of. But they had oil,
Right.
like little lamps in them.
Yeah.
So total I think it was 9, but 7 actual like oil lamps up there. Which
And I don't know if that was intentional or what, but
I think so.
okay.
As I recall, I think it was. It was obviously meant to signify like the lampstands in the temple. That was that I can say for certain.
Well, we did a lot of stuff like that. That was, the way we would burn our prayers, because
Yes.
there's a scripture in Revelation that's like our prayers are like sweet smelling incense to God going up to Him. So we would put prayer requests in this bowl, and then occasionally, like maybe twice a month, your dad would say, "Let's burn these, Michael," and he would burn the prayers and offer them up to God. I think there was. We like to play with the allegories and make them reality, even though that stuff is so, we don't even really know what that means. But, I think we kind of want a literal representation of that.
Okay, and I just looked up the 7 spirits, and I feel like I should have known that, being
You think you should have?
indoctrinated
Yeah.
for my entire life, and being forced to memorize
Yeah.
practically the whole Bible.
But that's
in
Revelation.
Revelation. Yeah, the 7 spirits of God. So are symbolized as 7 burning lamps that are before God's throne.
There it is.
There we go.
Let me tell you something else.
I thought
You
this
better
was a
be
new doctrine.
You better be up on this stage.
Oh.
No, but you were talking about the we
fire from
covered
heaven.
the lampstand. So yes, so the lampstands had imagery that was taken from Revelation. So talk a little bit about what happened with the fire that fell from heaven onto
It must
the
have been
stage.
super dramatic if
Yeah.
it fell from heaven, right?
Yes, yeah.
Well, you would
obviously.
think, and especially for there to be such hype about it, you would think that a meteor would have come to the room, and there would have been smoke, and it would have been smoldering for days. But no, really, what happened was I was sitting up front. I sat rather close up on these Friday night worship nights where the lights were very dim and the 7 spirits of God were glowing. There was one of the tea lights fell about 3 feet and, did what you'd expect. It made a little trace of fire onto the ground, and it stopped. It went out. But a tea candle falling 3 feet onto the ground was the fire from heaven. And so what really happened, and I was in the second row there, we had rat problems at the church. That was no secret. And there was a rat that somehow made its way up on that table, knocked one of those tea lights over, and that was it. That was the fire from heaven. And one of the members sitting up front ran up there to kind of put out the fire, to kind of see what happened. And so that whole thing was blown quite out of proportion. A rat hitting a tea candle versus the...
How do you know God didn't use that rat, though?
Well, that's just the thing. But yeah, you would hope anyway that if God was going to do these mighty displays of awe and power, that they would be a little bit more, like I just said, to be a flaming sword would come through the building, but
Yeah.
that's one of the dangers with believing this type of Christianity, where you just like you making the allegories real and all that, is that you just really want there to be some, like the theatrics need to be so intense that I have a hunch that that's kind of what was going on here, is that we needed, everyone would see us loving on each other and they would just naturally know what is going on at that church. So the theatrics had to just be really, really on point. So I have a feeling that that's part of what this whole thing was about. Your dad was a very theatrical.
I was about to say that. He always had a flair for the dramatic.
Yeah.
Always.
Hey, me too,
Yeah.
Well, humans are like that. I mean, you look at a lot of these churches, I've been to several. There's an order to all of them. There's a morning message, there's an offering, there's a little song set, and then there's the main message or whatever, however it goes. But the display of awe and power and, God's mighty sovereign, doesn't really show up every Sunday morning. And I think that your dad just wanted that. So just manufactured it on his own.
Yeah, I think so.
And was finding every way, even if it was a rat, and, knocking off a candle.
I think that goes back to human nature, that we seek those things out. It's like validation that there's more than what we're experiencing day-to-day life.
Yeah, and I get that too. I mean, I'm the kind of person that the mundane is very challenging for me. And the fact that I'm 40 years old now and that life is full of a lot of mundane things. You have to eat every day. You have to do the dishes every day. You have to bathe every day. And it's just like, where's the
extraordinary
spice of life? Yeah, exactly. So I think you're right. It is a human nature thing. We all are longing for more. And especially God is such a powerful being, and look at all the stuff that he's written in the Bible. Look at all these Jericho falling and all these unbelievable things. Where is any of that now? We go to church, we're there for a few hours, we sing a few songs, we learn a new Greek word, and then it's like, that's it. So do you think that has kind of a role to play here, that your dad was just bored on his own?
I definitely think that. I think that it all comes back to what you mentioned earlier. He was dissatisfied with the state of the church, because we were doing fine and running like a well-oiled machine, but nothing spectacular was happening at that point. I think that just did not sit well.
There was something when I was a kid where I may have been dreaming. I don't know. I woke up in the night. I thought I heard some commotion outside. I pulled back my curtain or blinds and there was moisture on the window. And so I just took my finger and wiped the moisture off, and I looked out and I saw what I thought were police cars in our next door neighbor's yard. And so I got up the next morning and I asked Mom and Dad, hey, what was going on next door? Because Dad always stayed up late. So I thought he might have been up and known what was happening. And both Mom and Dad were like, nothing happened. And so I told them, I recounted my experience. Instead of just assuming, well, that must have been a dream then, because that's completely likely. Dad immediately goes into, what if it wasn't, though? So he goes in my room. He's like, I know nothing happened next door, because he had stayed up. He goes in my room. He checks the window to see if he can tell if my fingers had taken the moisture away. He was talking about like alien abduction stuff, asking me if I knew what time it was and how long of a time. And that is just one really minor example of how he would take something that would just be ordinary and try to make something extraordinary out of it.
The huge leaps
Yes.
that he was prone to take.
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely
Or
sounds like
you
him.
know, when I was a kid, there were, I think I don't even know if any of the other kids had been born yet. It might have been the first house that I lived in with mom and dad, but I remember him telling this story about hearing this tinkering and clinking underneath the sink in the kitchen. And he said every time he would go in there, like, it would stop and there wouldn't be anything. Like, wouldn't your conclusion be it's probably a mouse, right? That's what I would think.
Sure.
No, that was demons.
Mm-hmm.
You know, demons were there and they stopped when I got closer. And so I feel like I have 100 stories that I could probably pull up if I just sat and thought about it long enough, of instances where he would take something just so ordinary and make it into something so much more with a lot of speculation. He seemed to enjoy the speculation process.
And there was also a particular set of circumstances. It was at the feast. I don't remember if it was 2019 or maybe it was 2020. Do you remember what I'm talking about with the photograph?
Oh, geez.
Yeah, it was this in the same vein, I think, and not just to pile on, but just it's illustrative of the mindset, I think, which is important to take into account when you're talking about, like, how did this whole group of people get in this spot at the direction of this one person?
Mm-hmm.
We were at the Feast of Tabernacles. If you don't know what that is,
Look it up online.
Yep, look at it, Google it. But we were at the feast. We were keeping it at a kind of a summer camp type area in Arkansas, and I don't remember the circumstances for how the photo was taken, but at some point, I guess Dad was on a walk in kind of a wooded area at night, and they had some, I think it was a ball field area, and they had like some lighting on the baseball field, like they do, some halogen things out there. And I remember that he took a photo with his iPhone of this area, and then he was going around and showing it to people and convinced and telling people that it was a photo of this principality, of a demon, and not just any demon, also like one of the demons that is spoken about in Revelation, or, like we're talking about like biblical, like proportion type stuff. Like this is the Prince of Persia type. That's what I'm talking about. It may have been.
It was him.
That he said Prince of Persia. Like we're talking about, which I think is from the book of Daniel, perhaps. I think it talks about Prince of Persia, which is a high-ranking demon type thing. So he's saying like this Prince of Persia high-ranking demon was sent here to this camp to try to, do whatever, try to stop the love move. And Dad took a photo with his iPhone, which was literally just like some trees.
I saw it.
There's nothing there.
It was a lens flare.
There's nothing there.
And he's showing that, saying like, see, you can see the demon. So again, not to pile on, but I think to illustrate, like, this is the mindset. This is the rudder in the motor for the church atmosphere, is that.
Absolutely. And I think we should post that photo. Someone sent it to me.
Yeah,
I zoomed in on that and looked. I'm like, what? I didn't even know what part of it is he saying is a demon. It just looked like trees.
Because it was.
Yeah.
Spoiler, it was trees.
Oh.
Yeah, those things happened quite a bit. Those types of. There was another one where his phone chirped and he was unfamiliar with a sound that the phone made, and he was convinced, and he brought it up in a sermon that morning, I believe.
Oh, I think was this at the feast?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's more to that, which you may or may not remember. It was that what I think happened is that Dad, in conversation when he's in his cabin, said something that triggered Siri.
Oh boy,
is what I think happened. And if you say, "Hey Siri," it will listen to what you're saying. And what he said, that I didn't get to see it, what he said that his phone screen said was, "Hey, seer," as in like
seer, seer.
Someone who can, see visions type thing. "Hey, seer," and then said a bunch of other stuff. And I think probably what it said was, "Hey, Siri."
Naturally.
And then was gathering what it could tell of what he was saying in the room, which was a bunch of weird apocalyptic, quasi-biblical stuff. So that's what it had on the screen, is what I think happened. Now, again, like I said, I did not see that. But again, to give people kind of like a little bit of the picture of the atmosphere, like those things that I feel like any rational person would be like, oh yeah, my phone was listening to me. Instead of that, it was the devil himself is entering my phone. It's possessed now. And the Prince of Persia from the book of Daniel and Revelation or whatever, like it's out here in these trees where I'm walking around. It's coming to kill me in particular.
Okay, that's what I wanted to talk about next, because I know that he said that he was going to have to battle a demon, and wasn't that like on Mount Nebo or something? So I'm curious, was it that specific demon that he says he took a picture of? That was the demon that was there to fight him, and God had given Satan authority to attack him or something?
I forgot about that. Do you know more about that, Matt?
I don't want to misspeak, but I feel like the Prince of Persia demon stuff, that was like the precursor to like Satan himself coming. Because what he was saying at the time was like, no, Satan himself, who is not omnipresent, is coming specifically to try to kill Dad.
Okay, wait. There was the demon Pretense.
Yes. And that one had been banished by this point.
But can we talk about Pretense? Because sure. Pretense was the demon, and we have this in our intro.
That's the only damn demon we ever saw. It was him. It's so hilarious because we talked about that on my last one, I think. Right? Do you remember that?
Everything's pretense.
It doesn't. Everything was freaking pretense. It's like, but there's this and that. But later on, it did start getting into the Prince of Persia and some of the high-ranking demons. But man, this pretense, and of course, he was the one that was assigned to us. So of course, it makes sense that there was always a way to like rationalize any of this stuff.
Okay, I've got something I can read here.
Let's go.
Nice.
Okay, this is a prophecy, I guess, that Dad had in August of 2019, so very early on. Dear brothers, please lift me up in fervent prayer. Last night I received the revelation of a prophetic dream I had last year. In the dream, I was in the water praying over a woman I was about to baptize, when suddenly crocodiles rushed in to devour her. But I kept praying and easily kicked the crocodiles away. Then suddenly the devil sent a giant crocodile called Pretense, but with one backhand slap I disposed of him. Then the water we were standing in suddenly disappeared and dry ground appeared. The sister and I climbed up on the bank, and as we turned, we saw a massive male lion raging and charging at us. I was able to fight him off because he couldn't get up the embankment. But then he suddenly turned and ran down to a place where he could come up on level ground with me. The brethren were all around between the lion and me, but he was focused only on me. My back was against a massive wall, and I had no place to go. The lion fixed his eyes on me as he paced back and forth, but he was reluctant to charge me. He was wary and was studying how he should attack. I thought, if I had a weapon, I could shoot and kill this lion, so I looked over to my son Michael and said, "Get my gun." But he wasn't looking, nor was he aware of what was happening, and that's how the dream ended. And then he's got a little bit here about the revelation of the dream, which I'll briefly read. So the revelation of the dream is, the crocodiles were demons that have been sent to attack me, the church, and our ministry. Pretense was sent to devour the sister because she was receiving a powerful anointing as I prayed over her. We have been battling the powerful demon Pretense for years, and the Lord told us that Satan had assigned him to work against our church. But I believe that he is gone now because I haven't seen any evidence for months. Last night the Lord revealed to me that the lion is the devil himself and will come soon to kill me. The Lord revealed that the devil has permission to kill me if he can, but that with the right weapon I can kill, not literally kill, but banish him from hampering our ministry and render him powerless. In the dream, I didn't think I had that weapon, but this morning the Lord told me the weapon needed for my victory and his defeat is faith. Please pray that I have faith, brothers. The Lord told me that one day I would be alone. It is this moment to come when I must face the devil directly and alone. Pray that I am ready and filled with faith.
Wow. Wow.
And that's just a taste of the stuff that we were getting on like a daily basis.
Yeah, it would never stop.
Yeah.
I think it's important to mention, you left out her name, of course, but this woman, this sister, was the same woman who he shared a heartbeat with in the other vision. Oh.
Yeah, in these prophecies and visions that were being had here, obviously Dad is in all of them, and very important. And then this other person, Sasha, is most often in these. And there are some others about, which you might recall, Sandy, about like the highway and all this stuff. And again, same people involved, always the same.
Okay, what about the prophecy that I heard of her raising him from the dead?
Let me look real quick.
I'm curious where that falls on the
Y'all need to put
timeline.
your cloaks of humility on, because there's about to be some doo-doo flying at us. Did we talk about the cloaks?
Can I have an invisibility cloak? Because I would totally want to be invisible
I
in
was
that
so
church.
indoctrinated that I would write cloak on my arm. So that anytime I looked down, I'd be like, oh, cloak of humility, animal feces all over my face and chest. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That was crazy.
So what did that mean to you, to wear a cloak of humility?
That's a good question, isn't it? Well, your dad would define humility as he would tell a story about this person defining humility. And I can't remember who it was, can't really remember the context, but it's not thinking less of yourself. It's not thinking about yourself at all. So
You're just like a non-entity.
kind of,
Like,
isn't that funny?
not even, it's beyond putting others before you. Is that what you're saying?
I guess for me it was, I guess it's the fact that I knew how selfish and self-centered, well, that's the same thing. I was
Unworthy.
very, very concerned about myself, that I was trying to remember to be a little more selfless, to be even fake humility, because one of your dad's big things was always act as if. In other words, fake it until you make it. So maybe if I just act as if I'm humble, maybe I will be.
So you're just constantly monitoring yourself and everything you do and think and say. It sounds like
that brand of Christianity is just behavioral modification, because God expects this, and your behavior needs to change, because right now you're just worthless pile of shit.
This is long, but it's good. You want me to read it?
Sure.
We don't have to keep it in.
No, we need the cloaks.
Yeah.
We need the cloaks. I would argue we do not need the cloaks. Let's burn the cloaks.
So on the Cloaks of Humility piece, this looks like September 2019, titled Our Cloaks of Humility. This is from Dad. I saw us on the battlefield after we had defeated the lion's army of darkness, and we appeared battle-worn and quite majestic. Our armor bore the marks of close warfare, but we were standing tall and strong with our swords of truth lifted high in victory, though our shields of faith were noticeably battered. Angels appeared and led us from the battlefield to a clean place where we heard the voice of the Lord say, "Remove your war garments from this time forward. Humility will empower and protect you, and a divine fire will go before you." These war garments are all we had ever known, and we didn't want to lay them down, but we obeyed. Then the voice of the Lord said, "Bring the kingly attire," and lines of angels, each with a single piece of clothing, one by one, adorned us. Our kingly apparel cannot be described, because I could only see white and no definition. I'm not sure if it was because of the dazzling brilliance or that human eyes are incapable of seeing this heavenly reality. As we stood in awe of our own beautiful appearance, we missed our old war garments no more. Then we heard the voice of the Lord say, "Bring the cloaks of humility." As I have mentioned before, I need to read it. I'm sorry.
Let's get some voice actors in here.
Bring the cloaks of humility.
Yeah, I'm being a little too campy. Bring the cloaks of humility. As I had mentioned before, they were absolutely disgusting. They looked old, filthy, and covered from neck down to the feet. We knew they were thick, heavy, itchy, and smelly. Foul, foreign materials such as weed stalks, matted hair, and something that appeared to be animal dung were all in the mix. We were nauseous and didn't know how we could possibly touch such a grossly disgusting cloak, much less bring it in contact with our dazzling kingly attire and wear it. This time the angels were forbidden to approach us to clothe us with our cloak. They were commanded to stand at a distance. Then we heard the voice of the Lord say, "Let him who will follow the Nazarene come and take upon himself his covering of humility, for it is written, 'Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in spirit, and you will find rest for your souls.'" After this, I could no longer see in the spirit. It ended before I could see who of us stepped forward to ask for our cloak. I knew that each cloak was uniquely fashioned for each person. I also knew that each of us who asked for our personal cloak were required to clothe ourselves in it with no help from angel or man. We somehow understood that as revolting as it was to wear the cloak, that in wearing it we would be clothed with the very power of Jesus. There is why behind how each of us found our cloak of humility to be unbearable. It seemed unbearable because it actually was. It would take the power of God, because the voice of the Lord spoke again as we tarried in the valley of decision, saying, "With men it is impossible, but with God all things are possible." This mighty people, the likes of which the world has never seen, will each be clothed with their tailored cloaks of humility as the consuming, passionate fire of the Lord goes before them. Each of us have a tailored cloak to be sought, received, and worn. For each of us will require the most difficult of sacrifices. What will be required will be impossible without the Lord. You won't want to seek, ask for, and receive, nor wear your terribly uncomfortable cloak of humility at first. But as Jesus promised, it is the only way to find peace and rest in Him.
When was that?
September of 2019.
Okay.
So we're talking like weeks into this really kicking off.
Okay. So he's still in the mode of preparing you for the uncomfortable.
Yeah, most definitely.
Okay.
Like, you're not going to like this. This is the message. But you got to do it.
Can I read something very quickly that
Sure.
may pertain to some of this?
Yeah.
This is what I keep thinking of. I just wrote it down. What are delusions of grandeur? Delusional disorder is a serious mental illness where you cannot tell the difference between what is real and what is not. Delusions or false beliefs come in several types. Delusions of grandeur are one of the more common ones. If you believe that you are more powerful, wealth, smarts, or other grand traits, that is true. Some people mistakenly call it illusions of grandeur, but I thought this was interesting. Symptoms. Even some healthy people can hold unreasonably high opinions of themselves, but unlike them, someone with grandiose delusions is unshakably convinced that their delusions are true. For example, they may believe that you are a multimillionaire, found a cure for cancer, are related to a Hollywood celebrity, or are battling principalities or demons. But man, your dad was always like that. And in fact, that's one of the things that offended my dad about your dad in his messages were commonly his cavalier attitude towards demons. And he would make comments like, I'm not afraid of demons. I fear no demon. And just his...
It was braggadocious, the way he said that.
Well, and we've got some of that in like the intro to the pod where he was just as a matter of fact.
Very matter of fact.
But I know him, right? So, I mean, you guys do too. And when you know somebody and they say something, the tone and cadence, all of that matters and kind of helps you interpret the meaning or the underlying feeling of it. And when I heard the sermon that is part of that is or was in our intro, I recognized it immediately as elevating himself. Like, oh, well, what did he say? I'll say, get away. And he's like laughing. And that laugh is just so Dad.
Mm-hmm.
That laugh is like, yeah, they're no match for me. It's that tone,
Yeah,
right?
don't be ridiculous. Laugh
Yeah.
that he'll get, where it's like, yeah, come on.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if other people who don't know him well would pick up on that. Maybe they would. But that was the first thing I thought, wow, you just have no shame whatsoever. It's just so grandiose.
There's another scripture that this started the love movement, I think. It was Hebrews 12. And I believe that this was so big in the beginning. It was, it's so long to read, but it's basically, you guys have come to Mount Zion. You remember all this?
Mm-hmm.
So your dad was making a case, and I think the reason I'm bringing this up because it's a delusion of grandeur, that our church is helping fulfill this prophecy right here and now. But the thing that made that special is that it was our church. These other churches, no.
Mm-mm.
Maybe someday they'll take part in it, but that's why we all felt so special, is that these 30 people, these 28 people, if you turn your Bible to Hebrews 12, like, this is us. And we all believed that.
We were the latter rain.
The latter rain.
Like, we were the ones. We're not talking about like we're alive in the time that this is happening in the church as a whole. No. Crusade Church.
Yep.
To drive it home for people. Crusade Church in Russellville, Arkansas. Us specifically. Me specifically as a person. You, Sandy, as one of the 30 some odd people. Like, we specifically, latter rain.
Yep.
When the whole thing is kicking off and the Lord's going to return in a few years, like, we are specifically part of that.
Yeah.
That was the language that was being thrown around at that time.
Well, and whether or not he knew that what he was doing or not, it's a really dangerous. Well, that's not the right word. It is dangerous, but it's also, he really took advantage of some of the people in that church. Me in particular, I'm the kind of person that kind of wishes my life went another direction in some ways. And so if you feel like you didn't accomplish some of the things that you would have liked to, but suddenly you're going to face off demons, and you're going to face, you're a part, you're not just a part, you're God's generals in this army.
It's like a redemption arc type thing. Like, yeah, you gave up this stuff that you loved, but check this out. Now you get to be part of this, like, the big end time move.
Exactly. So answer, how does a person that leaves the church start dealing with that afterwards?
Yeah.
When I talked about in my last one, it's like I was not prepared for the latency period of what that was going to do to me. I remember being really thrilled when I was out, and for a couple of years, just thrilled. And I was free to kind of pick up things from different teachers that I liked, that seemed more applicable for me. But now I'm just totally confused about all kinds of things, and it's a mess. And now you're back down to like, well, I'm not in God's army. I'm not a general, and I didn't accomplish any of those things. So, yes, therapy is helpful. But man, that really did a number on me. I can't speak for anyone else, but I can look around and see, like, yeah, this is a very dangerous thing to do what he did.
Well, maybe if you'd put on your cloak like he told you to,
Damn
be
right.
dealing with this,
You are damn right.
No, but we kind of, I wouldn't say that's a sidetrack, but just kind of like setting the stage for, I think, to hammer home for people a little bit. And again, the stuff that we read, like, this is a snippet. Mm-hmm. This is just to give people some context for the atmosphere. So we kind of talked to, I think, where we left off of the love move, quote unquote, was things that we hadn't really seen before. And we hadn't seen it before because they were, like, not ever going to be allowed. like the long hugs and the heavy petting and people laying on other people that are not, brother and sister or married or any of that stuff. Like that stuff was now like open season. So kind of jumping back into that period of time, which was pre-COVID. I think we're talking about from August to, I don't know, March, end of March kind of era. So, I mean, from your perspective, like what were some of the other like key markers of that, if we want to call it like the phase one of the love move? Like what were some of the other key things that you could identify with that love move?
Well, everything was longer now. Services were longer. Worship sets were longer. Prayers were longer.
Louder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything was doctored to intensify a response from people, and everything was a lot more emotional. And with our worship, when it came to music, which is something, everyone's got their own flavor. This church does this church does that. So we were the kind of church that would, we would throw up a hand or two, a couple hands. No real, it wasn't like party time up there. It was more of like a reverence to God and one hand up and the head bowing or the head rocking with the music.
Were there amens? Like
Right.
if you agreed, amen, that kind of thing.
There
You could
were,
be vocal.
but not super vocal.
Yeah.
Like now a common one, like in the younger churches or like the cool hip churches, it'd be constant crowd members saying, "Come on, man, come on," that kind of stuff. But no, not a lot of that with us. But that started to intensify as well. But then so with worship, we started to kind of let loose a little bit. Screaming, dancing, battle cries. Like I was screaming in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I could do it now if you'd want it. But no, I mean, I was one of the people that was, maybe I wanted people to know that the arrow had struck me, even though it hadn't. Act as if, fake it till you make it. It was kind of like that. So I was one of the ones in there that was getting that party going. And I remember some of the looks made me feel very uncomfortable. I was getting the side eye at this point, like, what the hell are you doing, man? And
By the people who had not been struck with the arrow yet?
possibly, yes. Yeah, I imagine if they're side-eyeing me that the arrow hadn't struck them. Yeah, but we were getting live in there now, and I think that your dad used me as one of the ones to kind of usher that in with a lot of jumping and dancing. And there'd be times when I wasn't feeling like doing that, and your dad would come over and say, like, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
What, you're not feeling all right? And that always made me feel pretty uncomfortable. I felt used, even back then, kind of like, I'm having an off night. Leave me alone. But he needed me to kind of get that party started. And, we started doing more things as a group together on stage around in a circle where it used to be everyone was at their pew and the lights were dim. So you were kind of free to do whatever you wanted without fear of judgment, But we got out of that and like everyone was together in a circle and just these real loud sounds, but also displays, like people getting on their knees and weeping and which, I'm not making a judgment against. It was just so different. It was so different to see.
Laying on the altars, which we mentioned, I think in one of the things that Dad wrote. Dad built 2 altars, which the best way to describe them, I'll just briefly run through it real quick. They were, 6 foot long, 2 foot wide benches, padded benches is what they were. And there was one in front. And I know that he had specific names for these. I cannot off the top of my head
The altar
remember.
of consecration.
Was that what it was?
And the
there were
altar
2
of presence.
Okay. Yeah, there were 2. So the consecration one was the more drab colored, right?
Yeah.
And that was in front of the lectern, in front of the stage.
Correct.
And then there was a golden altar, which one was the presence? Altar of the presence.
Yeah. Was
at the back of the stage in front of the lampstands.
And in the marriage carriage.
Yes, which he called that was the area of the stage is what he called the
that
marriage
was
carriage.
The marriage carriage where the bride would, you know. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I know there were moments too on Friday nights where I think Dad was not pleased with everyone's buy-in. And on Friday nights during the love move, most people, maybe half, I don't know, as much as you could reasonably fit, were up on the stage, kind of in a circle, which it wasn't a huge stage area. It's not a giant church, but we didn't have a lot of members, obviously, but probably half or more are up on the stage. And then other people are kind of down the steps a little bit in the area between the stage and the pews, maybe a couple in the pews. And I remember he did not like that. And he said, if you're not up on this stage, like you're not, I don't remember the terminology, but you're not in the marriage carriage, whatever it was. Like that was the message was like, you need to be up on the stage. If you're not up here, like you're not actually in it. You're not doing what you should be doing.
Yeah.
And then the next week, everyone was up on the stage.
Every member of the church, and there was no room to do anything.
No. And then I remember he said, well, I didn't mean literally up
Not
on the
literally,
stage.
yeah. So it was like a constant push and pull with him. You never knew.
Like you never knew where you stood, which of course, I mean, if you just want to look at cult tactics, that is one. Keeping people on their heels. Again, I can't say that this was premeditated by him. I don't know. I can't get in his head. But he certainly hit all of the key points of this stuff. So again, I would have to say like, yeah, but he's the exception, the outlier, which I just, the further we get away from it and get some perspective, the less I believe that. I think this is exactly what it looks like, frankly.
That's a really embarrassing time for me to look back on. Almost, I just need to just completely just shut it out because it's, it's just so embarrassing. Dancing around with myself and, picturing I am God's bride and hand to my breast and just really feeling it. And, we would have these separate ceremonies that actually we quite enjoyed because they were put on by us. They were not sponsored by Larry. I believe it was a Thursday night or something. We got the fire had hit us at this point, and we all went, or the arrows rather, the fiery arrows. So we thought, you know what? What's one more day in God's presence? Worshiping. Let's do it. So for at least three or 4 months, we would go have our own little personal setup at the church, and it was just really personalized, and everyone had a lot of space. And the thing is, I mean, hearts were in the right place. Nobody can see the condition of my heart, but I knew like I was trying to, be with God. I was really trying to show him. I was trying to love on God, but it's super embarrassing to look back on all that stuff. It hurts. Another strange thing about worship that doesn't make a lot of sense to me is if you think about God as a father, which, he says he is our father, right? My dad, who I love dearly, my earthly dad, has never told me that he would like me to start worshiping him with song and dance. And it confuses me because there's so many things that I feel like you can picture from your dad, like the unconditional love of your parents and all that. But my dad never said, hey, I know this is going to be a little strange, but like, we'd like you to start worshiping us on like you can pick a night, Thursday or Friday. Songs would be good, preferably songs about how good I am. Yeah, that's just, my dad's never done that. And so for me, I'm a little bit confused about what we're all doing with worship. I know it's just weird. I mean, like I said, I think enough said. But so that's been like a thing with me for worship the whole time. Like, what the hell are we doing? Does God command this or else? Or is it just like I don't really know how to say. It's like, okay, so God's not demanding my worship or he'll send me to hell. It's just kind of like, he's just kind of, and this is something that your dad would kind of pull, like, you don't have to do anything. No, do whatever you want. You don't have to do anything, but do you want to? It was like that test. Does that make sense? Like, you probably have a better way to put that. Like,
well, he would, it's in the same vein, he would pull like, you can be whatever kind of member you want to be. But then in that message is like, yeah, but this way obviously is the best way.
Exactly.
You want to be in it, right? mean, you can do what you want, but
Right.
if you want to really be in it, like, here's how to do it.
Yeah.
And so then who doesn't want to, like,
Exactly.
be in it?
And you're going to be treated accordingly.
Say again?
You will be treated accordingly.
Of course. Yeah. Like,
Can you speak
Yeah.
to that a little bit? Because you had mentioned, like, the embarrassment of that time, and maybe I'm jumping ahead, but when you started to kind of not feel that so much, like you were like, yeah, I'm not cool with this, when like the treatment, how that changed as you kind of backed away from this love move stuff.
the treatment of your dad.
Yeah, like how you felt, like the vibe towards you was not like, here's my cheerleader anymore. Like that
Sure.
very much changed.
Well, that is a kind of a foggy period for me, but I do remember distinctly there were, and this was definitely when we all got back from COVID for however long we were out, 3 or 4 months, and your dad expected business as usual from the beginning, the long hugs and all that stuff. And I was not one of the ones that was on board. I didn't want to do it anymore. I didn't want to do that stuff. I don't even know why I was there. I really don't. I really don't know why I was there. And if I was, I wish I would have left just on my own, to be honest with you. But
Did you consider it while you were
No,
out with
never.
COVID?
never.
Okay.
Well, before I have you jump to the change, let's just run through, like, so, the love move is happening. We've kind of talked about some of the language that was being used and the vibe. So, COVID hits for us March 2020, I guess. Our dad was deathly afraid that the devil was using COVID to kill him. And that I know for sure. So where normally I think Dad would not have us break and not have services in person, he did. So we were doing remote services for a period of a few months. So from the time that we break, kind of go through a little bit, best you can recall, like your mindset. We break for, COVID, and through that period to where we came back. Like, what was life like for you? I know you were watching like what we were making online, and you were a part of some of like the music stuff we recorded, but you're away from the church. You're away from the normal everyday kind of grind. And like you said, the weekly or the midweek things that you guys were doing, like those ended. So like, what was that time period like for you, best you can recall?
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember enjoying it a lot, the freedom of not, because look, I was in that for 4 years or so before COVID hit, and I hated the fact that I knew Friday night was coming, and you lost your Friday. Friday was gone, and Friday's the fun night. Everyone, even if you're an adult, it's like, that's the fun night. Nobody has to work the next day. So to know that you had to go into this church I dreaded it. Because I didn't want to be there anyway. I didn't want to like sit there through an hour of silence while people like mustered up the courage to pray, or just the whole thing. I didn't want to do it. So it was really freeing for me to kind of do what I wanted to do on Friday. And if it was spend time with God in my room alone, that's great. But it was really, really freeing to know I don't have to be anywhere. I don't have to. Your dad he's got this gaze, and he'll constantly be like probing the temperature of the room through his sweeping gaze, and, oh, Sandy must not be doing well tonight because of this or that, or this person over here doesn't look like they're in it today. So it was really nice to not have that pressure anymore. I could just be me. Saturday would come the next day. We'd be streaming our services live, and I really didn't want to be doing it. I hated it. And our little house, 3 guys in there, we're all members of the church. We would all be sitting in there watching this message. And maybe a month of that went by before I started not coming out anymore, watching it as a group. And I would get texts from another member in the house saying, "Are you coming out? Like, what are you doing?" And it kind of guilted me to kind of go back out there. It was like weird, it's this strange guilt culture. But I started kind of doing my own thing.
Did he do any type of roll call where he knew who was watching?
That sounds very fitting, but no.
No, we were streaming on YouTube, so I could see like number of viewers and if somebody commented. But no, we weren't doing like a normal or normal. We weren't doing a like roll call, like who's watching, who's not. I think we assumed everyone was.
That's a really interesting point, though, because our church was so weird about this kind of stuff. If you go to just say like a normal non-denominational church, if you decide to be out 2 weeks in a row, maybe somebody would notice and maybe give a call like, hey, are you feeling okay? People are absent from church from time to time. They go on a vacation, their son's graduation, whatever. But if somebody from the Crusade Church was out 1 week, there was either speculation. Most of the time it was speculation. Like, oh gosh, I'm sure that there's probably something's going on or some spiritual thing going on. So you learn to you learn the temperature of that room pretty quick, that everyone's watching.
Well, and I don't want to bury what you said earlier, because I haven't thought about that in a bit, but you mentioned Larry's gaze.
Oh,
that
gosh.
it always was a little bit this way, but particularly during the move Friday night times. So everybody else is facing, almost everybody.
Thank you.
Is facing the back.
Right.
Or I guess like the stage area of the church. Like you're looking that way.
Guess where Larry's standing?
Yeah. So Dad would, during this era was on the stage in the middle at the back, looking the opposite direction.
Facing the church as Christ himself, the one slain before God. Your dad did have this complex, I think we've talked about it before. I don't know if you brought it up on here, that he would come into these services in all white. And
Okay, I had not heard that.
Oh, you
Not
had
every time.
I
But
mean,
not
I
every
knew
time,
about
but-
the regal attire and the sword on the night of, what was it called?
Court of King Jesus?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, but I did not know about the white clothing.
Yeah, he would come in with like a white linen shirt, and he was kind of like our savior.
If you like this episode of The Cult Next Door, please leave us a positive review and rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And don't forget to subscribe to be notified of new episodes.